Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. I just want to congratulate Brexiteers for a second because they've managed to screw themselves in a way that I didn't think was possible. I've just seen this article shared by the Food and Drink Federation, basically the organisation that represents about 1,000 food and drinks manufacturers across the UK. So pretty important people when it comes to the price of our food. And it's the Express saying, shoppers still paying the price of Brussels red tape despite Brexit. What they're referring to is the part of the Brexit deal that was renegotiated in January to solve the issues in Northern Ireland. Because as you remember, Northern Ireland didn't have a government for almost 2 years because the DUP was protesting against the Brexit deal, namely the fact that there was a trade barrier between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Because Boris Johnson's Brexit deal left Northern Ireland still following EU single market rules, whereas the rest of the UK didn't. And part of that involved products in Northern Ireland that weren't meant to be sold to the EU having to be labelled as not for EU. But in order to make trade simpler between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, Rishi Sunak just negotiated that food products across all of the UK would have to have that same label. And the Food and Drinks Federation is saying that's going to cost up to £250 million a year. Now here's the incredible thing about that. Because the whole idea of Brexit was taking back control, that the UK should be making its own rules, separate from the EU, right? And that supposedly this was going to save us money, like the £350 million a week on the bus. But since Brexit, we've seen that because products in the UK follow different rules to the EU, when we try and sell them to the EU, there's red tape at the border. And the same for products coming from the EU to the UK, with the Bank of England saying that that in and of itself is making our food prices go up. But you could argue that that's just the price of sovereignty, this whole taking back control thing the Brexiteers wanted, that now we get to control everything that's in our country. And as Julia Hartley-Brewer once said,
if the EU is demanding we give up on those fundamental principles, then I'm afraid a deal will not be done. And if there is a cost to that, then so be it.
And those of us who worked in EU affairs, we all saw that trade-off coming. You control your country more, but you pay a price for that. But the Express article beautifully highlights how this is worse than that. It says, Brussels bureaucrats are still imposing rules on UK food and drink manufacturers, with shoppers paying the cost at the checkout. Because they're not for EU labelling, that's not for our benefit, that's for the EU to protect their single market, because our products no longer necessarily all follow their rules. So that's essentially a rule from the EU that we no longer have a say over, controlling products in the UK, they don't even leave the UK, that's making our food cost more. So in many ways, that's a loss of sovereignty and a cost paid for that, and I didn't even see that coming. The Express even points out that the number of products that this will apply to can be determined by the EU, so we no longer have a say on that either, with UK manufacturers warning that they might have to change their labelling every time UK law and EU law diverge. Now this stuff kicks in October, but it's important to remember that this is only happening because of a Brexit renegotiation that Rishi Sunak did this year. Like, we were already in an economic crisis, and Brexit was already making things worse, and Rishi Sunak, our fearless leader, has managed to make Brexit even worse for us. After winning an election on the promise that Brexit would be done in 2020, 4 years ago, specifically promising that there would be no more renegotiations. So this one story manages to break 3 of Brexit's biggest promises. Take back control, we've got less control. Make us richer, it makes us poorer. Get Brexit done, Brexit is still ongoing and making us poorer. Like, I often wonder whether Brexiteers are actually hurting more than Remainers because they're the ones who actually believe this bullshit. And let's talk about how serious this is, because the Food and Drinks Federation is saying this will push up inflation. This will make your food cost more. Because the Food and Drinks Federation is saying this will add up to £250 million a year to their costs. So let's use an example for comparison. The Institute for Fiscal Studies worked out that if free school meals were expanded to roughly 2/3 of all the families that use universal credit, feeding roughly 900,000 children, that would cost roughly £450 million a year. And now, because of the Brexit renegotiation that Rishi Sunak just did, our food industry, during a cost of living crisis, is probably going to have to raise its prices by almost half of that. All of this so the Brexiteers could kick themselves in their own faces. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.